Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, program called What's Going On, and we come to you at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Mondays. And we are delighted to have Facebook with us. You know, I'm back on Facebook now, by the way, and I'm writing a column each day. You have to check my columns out. John, I'm writing the longest columns on Facebook, and people are coming back. I used to have a lot of fans. I don't say fans. A lot of person read my column. I'm not sure they were fans because I was getting so much criticism.
One day I was on a live chat thing. My business partner Charity does a show where she sells jewelry. And can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Anyway, so she said something about women, and I just typed in and I said women can be awful, and they flagged my account, and I couldn't post there for 24 hours because I said that.
Yeah.
I was like, and that was a joke, you know, and everybody was laughing about it, and then I got booted, and then it says, you know, you're unable to post anything because it doesn't fit in our description. It fits in our description of hate speech. And oh my God.
Yeah, I've been in there Facebook jail I think 3 times now. The last time I was, I think I could have gotten back on before the 2-year period that I was off the Facebook. Some of it was that I was not clear about how to get back on under another kind of umbrella. But I came back about 3 months now, and I'm thanking Facebook for not censoring me. I'm writing the same kind of articles I wrote before. And so far, so good. I'm going to maintain my low profile. I'm trying to go under the radar so they don't get me again. But you know how the conservatives are in terms of how we're treated on these social networks. But we're back, and we're very glad to have Facebook with us this afternoon. I want to also thank Mr. Paul Herring over there at 92.1. Paul, I want to commend you. You're doing a fine job over there, and you're such a great inspiration to us here at allpointstv.com. We hope we're doing our part to share what you're doing with our audience, and hopefully we're helping you with what you're doing over there on University Drive. You're over there in the Intellectual Center of Flint. Speaking of the Intellectual Center, I brought some books today, and I wanted to share with you some of the books I'll be reading over the next week or so. Some of the books that I ordered, I was just trying to find out someone that could give me some information that I don't have in my library already, because I got a library downstairs in my basement, and I have a lot of books that I'm trying to get through expeditiously, and I'm always ordering new books. So I will never be able to read my library because I'm always ordering new things. But let me tell you what I have here. Let's see, some of the books that I just got this past, Saturday, I think these books came in. And I will read you the names of the new books first, and then some of the other books we're covering today on the program. There's a book that written by Peter Collier and David Horowitz. I read several of their books. One of them, which I thought was a classic, the Rockefellers, is called The Rockefellers: An American Dynasty. And Peter Collier and David Horowitz, who have hooked up on a number of their publications, and that's one of them. I think that's kind of like the gold standard of what they've been publishing. But this book was one I got last weekend. It's called Destructive Generation, Second Thoughts About the 60s. And that book is, I want to read this one. I've gotten through the first half of it. I want to finish it because it's really giving some new insights on those that were radicals. And David Horowitz was certainly a radical in the 1960s. But, you know, you get older, and I guess it's another verification of that argument that if you are not liberal or radical, and I don't know if radical and liberal are interchangeable, but if you're not liberal when you are young, you know how they say, then you have no heart, and if you are still in that mode of thinking when you are older, then you have no head, because, you know, you get more experiences and you grow up and your ideas change about things. And I know that I can definitely verify that, because I didn't understand anything my mother was teaching me when I was coming up. But my mom kept telling me to live long enough, and I didn't know what that had to do with anything. I didn't know what that had to do with the price of tea in China. but I did live long enough, and now that I moved up into the idea she was talking about, I understand it perfectly now. It's too bad I wasn't able to find these things out while she was still with us. I would like to have apologized for my ignorance, but that's the way youth is. We all have the answers with the least amount of information. Then we find out when we get older we don't have any information, and that's where I am now. That's why I guess that's why I'm bringing all these books to the studio. But let me read some of the other books that I brought. I told you about the one that's by Peter Collier and David Horowitz, Destructive Generation. Second Thoughts About the 60s. And I'm a 60s child. I mean, that's my adolescence time in the 60s. And I thought we really had the change that we were looking for. They say we are the change that we've been looking for. I used to, I don't believe that anymore. We are the change that we've been looking for, because although I think this is what Kierkegaard said, we live our life forward, but we have a growing perspective based upon the past. We have to go forward with living, but to understand it, you have to look backwards into what has occurred. And I'm understanding it a lot better now in the present, but the things that I went through that I didn't understand at that time, I'm understanding a lot better now that we are past that point. And I think that's the reason why a lot of persons say the good old days, things look so much better when you get past it and you look back at it, and it wasn't so hard. I got through that. And so we talk about the good old days, but when we were going through it, boy, was that really a difficult time in our lives.
But can I ask you a question? Okay, if given the modern, my friend and I are kind of talking on Facebook back and forth about something similar to this. And given the ability for a lot of politicians now to just lie and get away with it, nobody calls them on it, except if they belong to the wrong party, then they're held more accountable. But anyway, do you think the civil rights movement, if you would put it forward more in this era, do you think the civil rights movement, with its expectation of justice and actually people honoring the contract that we call the Constitution, the document called the Constitution, you think that actually the civil rights movement could have happened with this lack of morality that we currently have?
Well, you're making a good point. John is asking the question: given the morality we have now, would that movement be possible under these conditions, as opposed to those conditions back in that time period? And there has been a shift in the country, and Dr. King would not resonate. Even Dr. King's voice would not resonate today as it did back in that time period, because some of the institutions have changed and some of the prominence in the community. For example, the status of the black church, which didn't have the same resonance in the North that it had in the South. And so King was a figure of some prominence because it was in the southern part of the country where the black church was a much more prominent institution. Even in his own time period, when King came to Chicago and went to Cleveland when Stokes was running for mayor over there, you could go and see that he could not get any grounding point in the northern states. King tried to do some things in the ghetto. He was totally out of his element. And when he went over to Harlem, as a matter of fact, which was Malcolm X's home turf, that's where, when he was signing his book, Stride Toward Freedom, that's when a woman by the name of Iola Curry took a letter open and stabbed King in his chest, because Malcolm X had said, why don't you go down there and let the Reverend King know how you feel about him, because not everybody was feeling his nonviolent propositions. But if you take him as a timepiece, King is a timepiece, and that timepiece was the 1960s. I have to tell you something. King was out of here before he was assassinated. I don't mean that he had been. I'm saying the assassination was the finality of his civil rights career, 13-year civil rights career. But King was on his last leg even at that point in 1968. and he had really outlived the civil rights movement, which is why he's down there in Memphis with the garbage workers strike. And that's not really a civil rights issue in terms of them asking for more pay. That's a bargaining issue, but King has gotten involved in it because the civil rights work that the civil rights movement was designed to do, which was in fact to, and listen to this very carefully, to push the Democrats off the rights of blacks in the South. You can see it was white folks and blah blah blah. You make all those kinds of noisy statements. I'm a student of that period of history. I'm one of the experts in it, if I may be so braggadocious to say that. And I will tell you that the civil rights movement was embedded in what King said on May the 17th, 1957, when King gave his first speech in a march in Washington. The one you know about is the one he gave on August the 28th, 1963. But King spoke on the third anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education case, where they had gone to Washington, D.C. in 1957 to celebrate the third anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, the integration of the ruling by the Supreme Court that said that separate schools are by their very nature, separate and unequal schools are by their very nature separate and unequal, because the egalitarianism is lost in the fact that the separation is mandated by the state. And so King went there and said in his speech, I think it's 6 times he said in his speech, which was a pilgrimage to Washington, he said, give us the ballot. And the idea he had was, once blacks have been given the ballot, they can then secure their own rights, because the politicians will be able to hear them. I mean, can you hear me now? That the Verizon commercial, they can hear you now in politics if you have a ballot that increases their hearing aid. And they certainly can't hear you if you cannot, in fact, vote them out of office, because that's when their hearing is down to the lowest level. The decibel is not even registered on 0, because if you don't have the ballot, then the politician's not going to have anything to do with you, because it's all about political power. And if you don't have any political power, you don't have any voice. And so that's what King was saying. But see, in 1964, you had the Civil Rights Act that was passed, and then in 1965, you had the Voting Rights Act was passed. And with that, what the Voting Rights Act did in 65, given the fact it was passed by the efforts of Everett Dirksen over in Illinois, who was a very powerful figure in the Congress, the Republicans pushed this bill, but the one that signed it into law, in other words, the one that was most visible about it being passed, was Johnson, who was a Democrat at that time. And because they saw Johnson signing it into law, then the Democrats got the credit for it. But that movement was over at that point, because King had asked for the ballot in 57, and 7 years later, you have a civil rights bill passed, and then you had the following year, you had the voting rights passed, and what they've been asking for, the ballot and so on and so forth, they had at that point. And the question then is, what is this? What work is there left for the civil rights movement to do? And that the civil rights work had been done. So, like all other organizations that have been set up to solve a single problem, once that problem is solved, organisms, and no organism that has been given life wants to go out of existence. And so the civil rights organizations had to find some other work to do. And that's why King is in Memphis on the garbage strike. And he's saying here, the garbage workers are on strike and Memphis is not being fair to them. We have to march again to put the issue where it's supposed to be. And that's what King is saying on April the 3rd, one day before he was assassinated. But he was a timepiece even at that point. And so the assassination of King, let's be honest about this, the assassination of King froze King in time and made him immemorial throughout the epochs of history, so that he's just as relevant now as it was in 68, but that relevancy was going away even during his lifetime. King would not have been relevant if he had lived longer. That's another thing. That's why we don't remember people like Marcus Garvey. Garvey movement had petered out in the 1920s, but Garvey didn't die until 1940. And by the time he died, by the way, dying in England, not in Jamaica, where he's now where he's an icon in Jamaica. But that's another thing. He wasn't an icon in Jamaica when he was alive, because Jamaica, he couldn't even get an attraction in Jamaica. And that's why Garvey came to the United States. But the point I'm trying to make here, and the point I am making here, is that King was frozen in time. And by being frozen in time, it makes it appear that King's relevance transcends different, epochs in history, because they froze him at 39 years of age in 1968, and therefore his being frozen at that point, and it had not become clear that the nonviolent movement that he was leading had petered out, because look at what happened in Memphis. Look at what happened in trying to lead a nonviolent march in Memphis in March of 1968, and that march ended up in violence in Memphis, and that compelled King to have to come back there, because nonviolence was on trial in Memphis, and that's why King had to come back in there. And he came back in there. There were persons waiting for him, and that's what happened to him. So John is asking the question about would it resonate the same way now as it was then? No, the fact of the matter is that King would it'd probably be something like what Magruder did in the Boondocks. And you probably remember that in the Boondocks series they had by this marvelous person, Magruder, this marvelous. I think in some ways he was somewhat of a radical. Put out the Boondock series that was on TV for a while. He had one of his cartoon pieces is that he had King in a coma. So all this time, King was in a coma, but he woke up out of the coma and came back into this time period. And he came back. The cartoon says King came back and he saw the condition of his people. And he has him out there, at the microphone, and King is speaking. And there are people on the dance floor, and they're doing, let's say, the Funky Chicken or some other dance. And King's trying to get their attention. And Magruder has him saying, brothers and sisters. And they're not listening. Then King is saying. And then King says, will you, and he used the N-word, will you N-words please shut up? And the people on the dance floor say, did he say what we think he said? Is this what I took all those whoopings for? Because people had fallen away from what King was saying. And so at the end of King's speaking at the microphone is that he said, I may not get there with you. I'm going to Canada. And he has King, the updated King, not saying when King said he'd been to the mountain, I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. When King said, I looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Well, Magruder has King saying, I may not get there with you. I'm going to Canada. And King walked off the stage and exit out of the movement. Well, a lot of folks did that now because times changed. I'll tell you another one that did it. Go read Bobby Seale's book called Seize the Times. Bobby Seale was one of the two founders of the Black Panther Party that was founded in the aftermath of Malcolm X's death. So they're trying to carry out some of the things Malcolm X was talking about. So the Black Panther Party was created, but it also came out of the Civil Rights Movement too in terms of SNCC, the SNCC. And so the Black Panther would have been the symbol that was used by Circuit Carmichael in Lowndes County, Alabama. And for people that were not literate, that needed a symbol they could go to and know what party to vote for, because they couldn't always read the ballot. So they had the Black Panther as a emblem, so you know that's the party they vote for, because they weren't vote for they were not going to vote for the Democrats, because that's who George Wallace was affiliated with, Ross Barnett, Governor Faubus, and some of the others, Sheriff Clark, Bull Connor in Birmingham, and some of these other segregationists. So the Black Panther was born out of the civil rights movement, with the youthful flank of that movement, the one that was headed by John Lewis, who at that point was the head of the SNCC. They're going to throw him out of there eventually. After the March on Washington, he's going to lose his mojo, and they're going to throw him out and put Circuit Carmichael in there, because they were looking, because Malcolm had spoken to that group and they went to a more militant direction, and John Lewis was placed on the sidelines. He's been riding that ever since. That part of his history has not been told, because John Lewis is riding that to get reelected by having to go out there and campaign by holding up there what happened in Selma when he led a march from the church up to the Edmund Pettus Bridge and got beat down, and then they turned him back, and he's trying to act like that march went from there to Montgomery. That march occurred. The march to Montgomery took place 18 days later, and John Lewis trying to act like that's the march he led at that time. John Lewis's march is March the 7th, 1965. And the march from going from Selma to Montgomery was the 25th of our march. And since I know it, I know John Lewis is a fraud, and so on and so forth. He's outdated too. King would be outdated today, and his voice would be difficult to listen to, because his cadence is different. I mean, listen to the rap artists, where they are moving like this. And King's when King was. I have a dream. It's too slow. The cadence. See, things change, and King's voice resonates in the South because they heard their minister speaking like that. Let me tell you another thing. That's how Johnny Cochran got O.J. Simpson off. O.J. Simpson murdered just like. What's that guy's name that's on these talk shows that said that O.J. killed everybody in that yard? But the way that Johnny Cochran got O.J. Simpson off, not that he had to do a whole lot of work, but they were looking for something to hang their hats on, because they had already determined they're going to exonerate this man of those murders. Because what you saw in that case was a warmed up version of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was 55. OJ is 95. So what you saw there was an updated version of it, where the characters had been changed. Rather than an all white jury as it was in Emmett Till's case, it was a multifaceted jury in OJ's case, where you had a black person killed. In the Emmett Till case, you had a white person killed by a black person. In the case of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, it was the reversal of that. But in terms of how the times change, you can see the flip side of the same thing going on in those two cases. And what I'm saying is that you see when times change, then it may look like this would resonate in this time period. But that's not true. And you can see it in King's case, and you can also see it in Malcolm X's case. I mean, look how big Malcolm X is right now. But you think Malcolm X is like that in 1965 when Malcolm was killed on that stage in the Audubon Ballroom on the 21st of February of that year? Malcolm was on that stage by himself, and all the ones supposed to show up, by the way, to that meeting that he was going to have in the Audubon Ballroom, they saw the handwriting on the wall. On the 14th of February, Malcolm X's house was bombed, and they were not going to show up. And the late Dick Gregory, I can remember him up there lying. you can see a lot of you can see a lot of things that people that were not there. I was there, and I've gone back over and studied the movement. I'm not bragging about it, but there's nobody in this country that's going to tell me anything about that movement. And that's all the ones involved in it, because I read their biographies and everything else they've written, and that's why I'm reading this book right now about the second thoughts about the 60s. I'm reading about the ones that were there. And so, and Elaine Brown's book, there's another book that can be read, A Taste of Power, because people are not even aware that Elaine Brown was the one that when Huey Newton was running for his life, having killed an officer named Officer Frey, thanks, John. John just told me we're taking a break with WFOV, and we're always very glad to allow them to take the commercial breaks, because we know that they're a commercial station. And so they'll be back as always in 4 minutes, and we always want to welcome them back in that time period. We're just so glad to have them as a part of our partnership here at the studio. So they'll take a break for 4 minutes and come back, and we'll see them on the other side of the break. Okay, with that being said, we will continue what we're doing here. People see King would be a part of this whole thing, where it looks like it plays out in this time period, similar to where it played out when he was in fact an actor on the stage of history. Or in Malcolm X's case, Malcolm is a much bigger figure now than he was in 1965. Malcolm. There's a thing about Malcolm X where it says that Malcolm said that the militants say I'm too moderate and the moderates say I'm too militant. They won't let me turn the corner. But you see, martyrdom brings people to the individual. I mean, look at the iconic status of Abraham Lincoln, the first president, the first of four, the first president that was assassinated, and the only one of the four that the claim is made he was assassinated for a high moral cause. That's why Kennedy's assassination does not resonate the same way as Lincoln's assassination, or we don't even know about the assassination of Garfield, who had been elected in 1880, and McKinley, who was assassinated. The vice president was Theodore Roosevelt, and when he was assassinated in 1901, you see that Theodore Roosevelt served almost all of his term, and then ran for another term, but respecting the two-term precedent, did not run for what would have been a third term. That would be up to his fifth cousin that did that with the second king we've had, the first king being Abraham Lincoln. You don't think we had kings in this country? I wrote a column about that today on Facebook, by the way, those of you who are watching us on Facebook. But the point I'm making is that you could think that things are the same in terms of status being the same, because martyrdom leaps over time spans. And so we think we know Abraham Lincoln. And there are very few people that know about Lincoln, but you see Lincoln's being frozen on the 14th of April of 1865 when he was assassinated. It looks like, they brought him into this time period as the person that's laying in that room across the street from where he was shot, taken to a home, and we think we know him because they froze him in time, and we've been looking at that assassination all these decades later. But that's how a person transcends his time. King does that. Malcolm X does that. But do not think for one moment that, let's say Malcolm, for example, if Malcolm X came here, his voice would be just as strange as Martin Luther King's voice. You not think so because everybody's talking about him, or talking about King. King was a timepiece in 1968, and if he had lived longer, he would have gone the same way of Marcus Garvey, because the work that he had set out to do had been done, and if he lives beyond that work, what is the relevance that he would have for the last part of his life? He's only 39 years old, so let's say he would live he said longevity had its place, so let's say that he would have longevity of the of what a person of his age would have had. So let's say he would live another 30 years, and if that had occurred, then you would had King dying in his 60s. And how much of what he did in the 60s, if he had lived another 30 years, which would have meant he went into the 90s, probably close to the 21st century, what would have been his relevance? He would have gone the way of the wind as the others. Okay, I want to welcome back. I'm glad you came back. Those of you at WFOV, thank you for coming back. And I definitely appreciate your being here with us at 92.1. And again, Mr. Paul Heron, thank you for your attendance to the program here at allpointstv.com, the program called What's Going On. So, no, I think we have to look at it through a different lens. And those persons did what they did in their time period. And I can appreciate everything they did, but it could not have happened the same way now as it happened during that time period, because, there were those conditions there. And those conditions do not lend themselves to the conditions right here. A whole different thing would be needed. Let me say this also. I sent a video on YouTube to a friend of mine because he's been arguing about, we are, how you changed and blah, blah, blah. And this is what you said, and now you're saying this. What they mean is that I was stating that it would take measures different from what was being applied. I was kind of like in the same mindset as the Weather Underground and those persons. I mean, we were, in a sense, we didn't look at it this way. We were out of our minds. Youth is like that. So when you're in a youthful position, you are a revolutionary. I mean, how old do you think those founders were? Jefferson and those. Go look at the time period in which they were revolutionaries. You think these persons were in the only one that had any kind of age in that convention was Benjamin Franklin. The old man of the group. They weren't all in that age group. Franklin was a revolutionary in his elderly years. But these are people that are rising up, but that's not their fathers and their mothers. They're not out there. They didn't sign the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. And if they were in that mindset, let me say this to you. If they were in that mindset, you would not have had, and I didn't even bring that book. I thought I had it there, but I thought I brought the book that has 85 Federalist Papers in it, which is the Federalist Papers written by, in the order of the ones that wrote the most to the least, Alexander Hamilton, and then James Madison, and then John Jay. John Jay wrote 5. Madison wrote 29, and Hamilton, the great theorist. Not that I had a lot of respect for his political, acumen, but in terms of his brilliance, you cannot argue with the fact the man was brilliant, probably the most brilliant person in the country at that time. I don't have a lot of respect for the way he carried out his Federalist, agenda. Certainly with the banking issue, because that's a bugaboo we're dealing with right now, with the country being out of control, the government being out of control because of the Federal Reserve System was set up. That's Alexander Hamilton was advocating something close to that back in 1791, and we can see that if he had done that, I don't know if we would have ever gotten off the ground economically, because that you can see what that's route. By what's going on in the country at this point. But their parents are not part of that revolutionary fervor. and you don't have any if they were revolutionaries in the country, if that's what the country was, then why did you need the Federalist Papers to be written?
Well, Franklin's son actually, his dad was parted ways. I mean, his son actually still stayed loyal to England, and he moved to England.
That's right.
They never talked to each other after that. So
Yeah.
I mean, if you just want to say like, look about the radicalism and stuff, his son considered his own dad radical.
Yeah, that's right. It's amazing that Franklin was in that mindset. I admire the fact that his elderly status gave him some status inside the convention. He was probably just as extreme in his determination as others were. And so, but that's not normally how it works. The youth are always more invested in change than the parents, because the parents have a toehold in the status quo, because that's how they are eking out their existence based upon the circumstances that exist right now. The youth have not joined that parade yet, so they are not as much invested in the status quo. And so you look at those framers, you see the same thing. Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison have to explain through the Federalist Papers why they need to ratify that Constitution. Because the Constitution is not as revolutionary as the Declaration of Independence, but it has some of the same energy in it. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And then endowing a president who in some ways has resemblances of the king, although restricted in terms of his powers and so on and so forth. Still, you have that person over the government, and that's a concern they have, because that is you're speaking to a conservative constituency, and the people are not going along with this revolutionary fervor. In fact, only about 2% of the people in the colonies were part of this revolution. Most of them were on the sidelines. And to their credit, I will give the framers this credit also, that when they won that revolution, there was none of the retribution that you saw in the French Revolution. Because in the French Revolution, they asked people, what did you do during the French Revolution? And they said, I survived, because they were chopping off heads left and right. That didn't happen over here. And that's to the credit of the framers. I give them a lot of credit for that, because they did not, it could have gone after, a lot of Benedict Arnolds that were here. One stands out and had to leave the country, but there were a lot of people that were siding with the British. But the British lost. If you're willing to get on board with the winners, you're not going to sabotage, then welcome into the fold. But you see, they did have some problems there, as can be seen by the fact they have the Alien Sedition Act that was signed into law by John Adams in 1798. And I'm just making this point here now. I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that every generation has its own energy. And you can't say because King looks to be relevant now, for example, or Malcolm X seems to be relevant now, that would have been the relevance if they had not had martyrdom on their side, so to speak, in terms of how they now transcend different time periods. And Lincoln would have been forgotten, pretty much, if he had not been assassinated. And then they imposed the reason for his assassination, which they claimed was his the war being over slavery, which I wrote about that today in my post. I want to brag about it. One of my best posts that I wrote on Facebook. You can read it and you can give me your feedback on it. But I wrote about that today on Facebook. And we have to just understand history is a timepiece. And those you bring up from the rear into the present is a personal choice. What you decide to remember about the past, because a lot of what happens in the past is not even recorded, and that which is recorded is selective. I guess that's what Napoleon was talking about when he said the history is a fable agreed upon. But after agreeing upon it, you have to then decide what the agreement is about, because it's a fable. It's that part of history that you decide to carve out and bring into the modern time period. And so, no, I don't think that you would have King voice resonating today if it had not been for the fact that he was martyred in 68, and then you can kind of bring him into this time period, out of his own time period, bring him into time period now. Okay, so that's one book I brought. Well, going back to what the books I brought. Destructive Generation, Second Thoughts About the 60s. I've had some second thoughts about it, and I feel very differently about it now than I was then. And I think in some ways, the way we were thinking about it during that time period, I think we were kind of out of our minds. But that's not unusual. Youth is out of their mind. In other words, it doesn't matter what time period you go back into history and you come in contact with youth, it would not be different in any time period you go into.
You notice that liberals are always, mostly liberals, and will say that, they have this fascination of what the youth have to say. They say, well, the kids say this, and the kids wouldn't do that. And my friend makes a point. He goes, your kids will eat your Dixie sticks, pixie sticks, those things that got the little powder, sugary stuff. They'll eat those for lunch. You don't let them do that, do you? You're supposed to step in and say, you're the adult, and say, that's not good nutritional content. I mean, everybody's so enamored with youth and think that they're offering some great insight. Yeah. And it's like, what? No, you're abdicating your role as being the older generation, as being the parental role. You're abdicating that. Just ridiculous.
Yeah, John, we tried the youth, and we have this to show for it. The Jewinocracy should not be in control because they don't have the experience, and they don't have the information. You can't acquire the information that you need to run anything at that age. That's why today the mindset is very different. I don't have those ideas. I mean, I can appreciate that we had good intent. That's that road, right, paved with those intents.
P.J. O'Rourke wrote a book called Age and Guile Beat Innocence, Youth, and a Bad Haircut.
Yeah, that's about the size of it. I mean, youth is like that, though, and it's never going to change. I was reading something about, I think it was by Socrates, not Socrates, but Socrates, a different person. And he was writing about the youth. And you could put that in the paper today, and it reads like what Socrates said back in the ancient times. It reads like the New York Times in terms if they were writing about the 60s or writing about today, because youth has not changed. They had a discussion. Give you another example of that. They had a discussion between a person that works at, I think he's at Berkeley now. His name was Ron Everett. Later on changed it to Maulana Karenga, who set up the organization called US, the ones that were fighting, the Panthers and US organization were fighting each other out there in California. And I listened to a debate that went on between Karenga and the late person named Manning Marable, who wrote this awful book on Malcolm X called Malcolm X: A Life of Reinvention. And it was a life of reinvention because a lot of what was written in that book was reinvented by Manning Marable. I had a discussion with Marable. I had lunch with Marable, and I will tell you that he tried to run that nonsense on me, telling me I was quoting Bell Hooks, and I was telling him that there's no black orthodoxy, which means that there's no point of view that all black people ought to have. Of course, these radicals don't want to accept that. There's a point of view that you have to have this point of view. If you have another one, then you sell out. And he was at my table. We were having lunch together. at a certain program. He was running that stuff by me when I quoted Bell Hooks and said in her book called Killing Rage that she had made the point there's no black Orthodox, and he disagreed with that. He said there is a point of view that all blacks ought to have, blah, 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 blah. Well, he wasn't expecting me to come back with anything because he's from Columbia University. He's coming from the mountaintop, so I'm supposed to be over there taking his notes. I don't take anybody's notes. You can forget that. So I asked him this question when he said there is a black orthodoxy. I said, give me an example. And he had never been asked that question before. When he got it from the table, he was the keynote speaker. When he got it from the table, he said, "There's a table over there where they really we were having a conversation. Yeah, I made him. What I did is I made him stop talking into a vacuum, because if you say anything, then you got to bring forth your proofs. Because I have my proofs, and since they're talking to the choir, nobody want to challenge them because of the authority in which they speak.
You know what, the expectation of a black groupthink or in step with everybody, even if it's the black activists themselves or the white liberals who always, I think I would be considered, I'd be repulsed by that.
Yeah, it is repulsive to say that there is a point of view that all blacks ought to have, because then you are saying then you are going one step forward, one step beyond the racists who said all blacks look alike. Now you are coming behind them and saying that all black people think alike. In other words, the blacks are simpletons because they have a singular view that all black people have, because the complexity of a multi-diversity of views is too complex. So the simple the view that they have the same is to say then that in that dimension they are inferior, which they are claiming it themselves without them even knowing it, claiming their own inferiority behind their own backs. But that's not unlike the other thing they do, and that is this idea of black leadership, which is that they have a leader that has quantified all the things, all the aspirations that black people have, and is quantified in a single individual who can lead 50 million black people. What is that other than saying that they're simple Simon in the black community? Because I run that by whites. When I had white and Hispanic roommates back in the 60s and in the 70s. And I used to ask them that question: how do you feel about this idea of, let's say, white leaders? And they told me the same thing. You're offended by that. Somebody is leading you, and really that you can't get that across even today. Even though this book called "We Have No Leaders," which is a very good book. Written in the aftermath of all this insanity. But Bonnie Adams' book is also important in the one that she wrote. Her book is called We Are Overcome. The book called We Have No Leaders, written by Robert C. Smith, and then Bonnie Adams has a book out called We Are Overcome, meaning that all of us have a role to play. It's not a spectator sport. And one of the myths she wrote in her book, 5 Myths About Black Leadership, one of the myths she wrote was the myth that black people need to be led. And if they need to be led, the question I would raise is, if black people need to be led, Al Sharpton, then what are you saying? And Jesse Jackson, if black people need to be led, the question is why? Give me a break. There are no black leaders. Particularly, they're not built anything. If you stand upon leadership, the question is, what have you accomplished in your leadership? And then that is a construction of what have you built. That's the orthodox view of leadership. Leadership standing on some institutional framework. And then the leadership is not the individual, it's the institution on which the individual stands. And that's true of our president. Because I want you to watch this next time. When they bring the president in and he's speaking before the nation in the requirement in Article 2 of where the president must give the State of the Union address, doesn't have to give it in front of the television camera, but this is a TV age, so you won't do what was done up until Woodrow Wilson, where they would write it out. But if you write it out, you don't get the television, effect. And of course, they're always running for office, so you're always running for the next election. So the president will always go go in person. They're not going to send a written State of the Union address to the Congress to satisfy the requirements of the Constitution. They're going to always now go before the cameras to do it. They don't have to. The Constitution just says that he will give a State of the Union address. Okay, and so, but I want you to watch him next time, because what you're going to see is that before the president comes into where the Congress is meeting as a body, members of the House are there, members of the Senate are there. If the members of the Supreme Court show up, they don't always show up because they may disagree with the president, plus the fact that they were looking at their offices being non-political, so they may not go into the body. Some will show up, some will not. Ruth Bader Ginsburg won't show up because she disagrees with the president, but she won't be showing up probably next time, because I don't think she's going to be around a lot longer. Not that I'm wishing her any ill will, but this woman is an ideologue, and she refuses to stand down, although her health is bad, because she does not want to give Donald Trump another selection on the Supreme Court. That's ideology over health. But when the president comes in there, before he comes in, everyone else is already in that room there, because you're paying homage to the fact that the president of the United States is the only office holder that the whole electorate, the whole people, invest their voice in the body of the president. And that is not any other office holder in the country. So everyone is sitting in before the president comes in that room. All the senators are sitting, all of the members of the House are sitting, and everyone else that is they're in that room before the president comes in, out of the respect for the institution of the presidency, which LeBron James, Stephen Curry, who I wrote about today also in that post, who are two of many jerks. They don't have any courage. You can do that to the president, but look what they did when it came down to their shoe sales. If they disrespected the Communist Party Chairman Xi over in China, look how they stood down in that case there, because it would have cost them something. These guys nothing but a bunch of cowards. And being disrespectful, having no respect for the institutional office. They don't understand it's not about Donald Trump. It's about the institution. That's why that sergeant at arms comes to that door before the president comes in that room, and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States," and then he's got a sword in his hand. and that has symbolic meaning. You're not coming in there disarmed. Symbolically, the sergeant at arms announcing the president is there to defend the president. But you notice one thing that happened there, and watch it next time. They do not even mention his name. The President of the United States. See if they say Donald Trump. Not going to mention his name, because respect is to the institution, and because he stands inside the institution, he is due a certain amount of respect. And that's what blacks don't get. And that's why they have these hobos like Al Sharpton standing in front of them like he's a leader of black people. Sharpton can't even lead himself. And Jesse Jackson had a love child up there trying to be the minister to Clinton when he had this problem with Monica Lewinsky. They had that was Jesse Jackson up there trying to give solace to the president. He has a woman pregnant outside of his marriage. I mean, the ludicrosity of it is what I'm talking about. The institution is important, and this things that we did. When I was a child, I thought of the child. I'm not a child now. I've grown up into the idea that my mom had, and I'm no longer that person. I'm that person through the degree to this person, moving from that person to this person, that you're in the same body, but you're not that person anymore. If you went back through your life, you would not do the same thing over again because you have learned things that do differently. You'd be something, I would be something if I went back through it. Let me get the rest of these books. I came here to talk about these books and want you to know what I'm going to be studying and talking about over the next few weeks. Horowitz book is very important, Destruction Generation. The subtitle being Second Thoughts About the 60s. And we ought to have a lot of second thoughts about the 60s. A lot of us got off base in that time period. Another book is another book by David Horowitz, and this one he wrote with Richard Poe. It's called The Shadow Party. Listen to this subtitle: How George Soros, Hillary Clinton, and 60s radicals seized control of the Democratic Party. Boy, is that true. The last book that I want to you'll be aware, we'll be talking about this book certainly at some length in the future, is a book called A Conspiracy So Immense: The World of Joe McCarthy, the person that's been blacked out in history. We need to talk about Joe McCarthy. We got to talk about him because of what's happening right now. Okay, we got to get out of here. Never enough time, but we'll get out of here. Be back next week. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.